Përshëndetje, zonja dhe zotërinj me Televizion 21 dhe kjo është emisioni Klik. Sonte kemi për mysafir ambasadorin e Shtetit Bashkuar të Amerikës, zotërinë Philp Kosnett. Mr. Kosnett, thank you very much for coming. Very great honor to having you on our show, sir.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great privilege. We will start. Nowadays, we've seen so many non-papers, so many people talking about Kosovo, so many countries which we don't know if those non-papers are theirs or not, but we still have the agreement from the Washington, which is the only one who has even signatures from both governments and President Trump. So can we assume that the Washington agreement in any way or form is the basis for going forward with the Kosovo-Serbia talks?
Well, let me divide that into a couple of different pieces.
Okay.
So first, about the Washington agreements. So the Biden administration took a careful look at the work that had been done under the previous administration and concluded that there's a lot of really valuable work. You know, we decided, the Biden administration decided not to just throw everything away that had been done previously. And the administration has formally concluded that we believe the Washington agreements should be the basis for our work going forward. That is to say, we believe that Kosovo and Serbia should adhere to those commitments and work together, work with us, work with other stakeholders to build on the agreements that were made in Washington, to build trade, to strengthen investment, to build relations with Israel, all the other elements of the Washington agreements. Now, that's not the only foundation for Serbia's relations with Kosovo. The United States is firmly committed to supporting the EU-led dialogue process. I think that you will see under the Biden administration closer collaboration and partnership with our European friends on a range of issues, and that absolutely includes Kosovo-Serbia.
But when you say a lot of valuable, does it mean that not in its entirety the Biden administration looks at the Washington agreements as such, or what?
No,
just explain it in detail. What does a lot mean?
Let me put it in very simple terms.
Okay.
That we support the Washington commitments. You know, there are many different items in it. Some may be higher priorities than others. And you know, you could look at them and say, some of it's already been accomplished, some of it's already been achieved, like Kosovo's establishing relations with Israel, very important. It calls for Kosovo and Serbia to take action against Hezbollah. Kosovo has done that. So you can go through the list and see that we're already making progress on some of these. The Development Finance Corporation has increased its activities in this region. We think that a lot of work needs to be done on regional trade and investment. Now, in that regard, people ask about mini Schengen or SEFTA, and it's easy to find gaps, to find fault with this or that mechanism. But I think the important point to take away is that Kosovo is a very small market, and Kosovo's economy is really only going to prosper as part of a larger regional economy. You know, people in Kosovo are always asking, what will it take to attract more foreign investment here? The fact is, this is a tiny market. If Kosovo wants to attract, for example, auto manufacturers, nobody's going to build a car factory in Kosovo just to sell cars to 1.8 million Kosovo citizens. But if it can be a base for penetration to the larger market, there's a chance. So people often will say, we don't like this aspect of mini Schengen, we don't like that aspect of SEFTA. What I don't hear very often is people saying what they would like to do instead. You know, because if Kosovo doesn't become part of this larger regional economy, I think it's going to stagnate.
Indeed. But let's go back to the first question. Can we assume that the agreement as such from the Washington is or will be the basis for going forward for the talks, which are already undergoing under the EU auspices?
I think that I wouldn't phrase it quite that way. I wouldn't say that the Washington.
You can't assume.
No. Well, first of all, you don't have to assume.
Okay.
Because I mean, I'm telling you that the Biden administration has embraced the Washington agreements.
Entirely.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, but that doesn't mean that when the governments of Kosovo and Serbia meet under EU auspices to go forward, that's the only blueprint, if you will. I think it's focused, as you know, on economic steps that are meant to improve the lives of ordinary citizens, okay? And that's something that Democrats and Republicans can agree on, the importance of economic measures that help the lives of ordinary people. There are also political elements of the dispute between Kosovo and Serbia that are not directly addressed in the Washington Agreement. So I wouldn't say if something is not written in the Washington Agreement that it isn't part of the topics for discussion moving forward.
Okay, so can you explain us how close are the European Union and the United States of America's positions on Kosovo, sir?
I think that they're very close. That there have been different approaches over the years to the dialogue. You know, clearly we have a lot of work left to do. And when I say we, I don't just mean the Americans and the European Union, because fundamentally it's for the parties, it's for Kosovo and Serbia to find a way forward. Under the previous US administration, we tried kind of a division of labor, where the Americans were going to focus on the economic aspects of the problem and leave it to the Europeans to focus on the political aspects. Now I think under the Biden administration, you will see a more traditional model where we are working together on all the different avenues under discussion. But again, it's up to Kosovo and Serbia, you know, to take the lead in this. I mean, we are there to support you, but we can't want change, we can't want progress more than you do.
Well, if it's up to the both countries, there's definitely big differences between Serbia and Kosovo, and especially on the political field, as we all know. And that is why the process since 2004, when they first started after the riots and the Kayada report, it didn't end up well. We have the Marti Ahtisaari plan, the comprehensive approach, which was rejected by Serbia, endorsed by Kosovo, fulfilled, and we had the whole bunch of set of duties that it did achieve because the international administration, its friends, and the international steering group put it that way. So how can we hope, I mean, how can we expect, how can one expect, from a citizen's point of view, 1.8 people, which are not all of them in the state, which are not working for the government, they do expect the Americans and the Europeans to get the clear guidelines where the dialogue would end, because everyone is hoping that under this administration, the President Biden, and especially now the new government in Kosovo and Serbia, it will be done.
Well, it would be very convenient for some people if the United States and the European Union decided what a final agreement will look like and just kind of, you know, imposed it.
Do you have any doubt on the final agreement? Since, I mean, the independence as such is a fait accompli.
Certainly, nobody seriously suggests, no one really can seriously suggest that Kosovo's independence is in doubt. Yes, there are people who will say that. The U.S. firmly rejects that. Okay. We support, as is well known, the United States supports a comprehensive agreement which includes as one element mutual recognition between Kosovo and Serbia. But there's a lot of details that need to be worked out before you get there. Now, my point is that the United States and the European Union cannot simply impose an agreement on the parties. We can create conditions that make it attractive, but in the end, you're going to have to do the tough work. By the way, you know, I don't know that I would say that all of these years have just been a series of failures. I mean, there have been significant improvements in Kosovo's situation, starting with independence. Some people would say without Ahtisaari, Kosovo would not be independent. You know, there have been some successes in strengthening the institutional connections between minority communities and the majority community. You know, I first lived in Kosovo in 2003, and you remember in those days, you know, UNMIK was running the country. The police were internationals, you know. That was kind of a shock. You know, I think that we can look at the police force, we can look at some of Kosovo's institutions and say that they've come really, really far. So when I hear people say that, you know, Kosovo and Serbia can't make any more progress, we're stuck, I don't agree with that. And I absolutely don't agree that progress between Kosovo and Serbia doesn't matter to ordinary citizens. Now, this comes up when people ask, what should the government's priorities be? Now, the Kurti government is deeply committed to improving the economy, to fighting corruption, strengthening rule of law. This domestic agenda, this is the same agenda that the United States has supported in Kosovo for 20 years. So we're all for that. However, we think at the same time, countries can't just put foreign policy up on the shelf and say, well, we'll look at this when we have more time. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to be encouraging Kosovo and Serbia to come to the table, sit down, keep working to resolve these differences, because the dialogue is connected to the lives of ordinary people. I don't think it's possible to talk about Kosovo's economic future, about economic opportunities for Kosovo, without talking about the need for regional economic integration, for integration of energy supplies, for reduced trade barriers. Now, all of this is relevant to Kosovo's relations with Serbia as well as to the other neighbors.
But on the political field, Serbia doesn't recognize in any way, shape or form Kosovo's institutions, be it from the sports, be it from the culture-wise, whatever it is connected to the Republic of Kosovo. He ain't gonna recognize, as of now. So what can be those hints, what can be those compromises that both parties need to reach out and to get on the table and write them down? What can it possibly be?
Well, we're not going to resolve that here at this table. There's
There's
another table. There's a table in Brussels where people are going to work on that. But
it's not harmful even if we know by public.
But I will say also that, people in Serbia talk a certain way. They have their perspective. But most people in Serbia know that their future lies in closer connections to the European Union. They don't see their future in Russia, in China, seriously. And if Serbia is going to strengthen its ties to the European Union and to this regional economy, they have the same benefits to look forward to that Kosovo does. No one said this was going to be easy, and it's true. It's taken many years, and it is a slow uphill battle. But I don't think that Kosovo can afford not to make a serious effort to move forward on the dialogue, because this gets to a broader point, Fatmir, which is that Kosovo cannot expect the next 20 years to resemble the last 20 years. Now, what do I mean by that? Over the last 20 years, the United States and other international partners have invested very heavily in Kosovo's success. And I'm not only talking about money, I'm talking about expertise and training and having advisors working with the police, the prosecutorial system to try to strengthen rule of law here. USAID, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, many agencies, the State Department, the Justice Department, the Defense Department, have worked to strengthen Kosovo's institutions and help it get on the road to self-sufficiency. For 20 years, okay. We don't regret that. It has been money and energy well spent. And when I came back to Kosovo after 15 years away, I was very impressed by progress in many areas. At the same time, all of our assistance is meant to strengthen Kosovo's self-sufficiency in institutions. It's not meant to create a permanent dependence on the United States. And European governments would say the same thing. Moreover,
so you have something in common with Europeans, at least.
Okay. Moreover, the diaspora is not going to provide the level of, let's be frank, charity to Kosovo that they have for the last 20 years. We've seen this pattern over and over again with immigrant communities in the United States. The first generation that comes to the United States sends a lot of money home. The next generation, they don't feel the same level of connection. So if you want the diaspora to continue to be deeply involved in Kosovo, and I think this is true for the European diaspora, not just the people I talk to in New York and New Jersey, the country is going to have to be more attractive as a source of investment. Wealthy business people overseas are going to invest here not out of sympathy or sentimentality, but because it's good business. Moreover, there are a lot of people in the diaspora who are not wealthy investors, but they want to contribute to Kosovo's development as well. I'm talking about doctors who want to build a medical system, artists who want to become involved in the cultural life here. There is a great desire among the Kosovo diaspora, the broader Albanian diaspora in the US to help Kosovo, but they're not going to do it just by handing over money. Those days are coming to an end.
And what about the US administration? Because you said the first 20 years we've invested a lot. What about the next 20 years, sir?
I think that we will continue to see some American assistance coming in, but what we're attempting to do, and this started in the last...
It sounds scary when you say some American investment.
Because, no, some American assistance, because what people call foreign aid, that is going to decrease. What we want to replace it with is investment. That's why the Development Finance Corporation is working, Millennium Challenge Corporation. One of the reasons that we were so excited about Kosovo and Israel establishing relations is that we see Israel potentially not just a model, but a partner for Kosovo in building up its tech sector, its agricultural sector. Israel is a leader in the world in that. These are countries in some ways are very similar. They don't have a lot of natural resources. They've got very smart, energetic people. And what we're hoping is that the business community in Kosovo, in Israel, and in the United States will take the lead with government support in moving forward to build up these ties. One of the things that most impresses me about Kosovo, and I say this again and again, is all of the energetic, multilingual, educated young people who could be successful anywhere in the world who are choosing to build a future in Kosovo. I mean, people talk a lot about brain drain, but there's brain gain too. There are people coming back. A lot of these are people that the US government paid to educate through the TLP program, for example. So all of our assistance up till now has been about helping Kosovo become more capable of charting its own future. That doesn't mean we're going to abandon you. It means that our relationship is going to evolve into one where Kosovo is less dependent on the US and is more of a partner. I think that's a success story.
No, indeed, I do share that. How about, let's go back again to the EU and US position on the Kosovo. On a political field, do you see, because we still have the 5 non-recognizers from the European Union, whose stand hasn't changed since 2008. How can it happen so that the US and the EU have a common policy or common guidelines on how the whole process should look like? That's why I'm calling, because that's why I'm referring to the first question, because we have an agreement from President Trump, Prime Minister Hoti and President Vučić, which was signed at the Oval House. So now, how it may look like with the Europeans?
Well, I think that you should ask that question of Ambassador Sunyog. I'm not here to represent the European Union. I will say that I think that if Kosovo and Serbia can make more progress, can narrow the gaps between them on a variety of issues, that is going to improve the likelihood that more countries in Europe and elsewhere are going to recognize Kosovo. So I think all of this is connected, but I'm not going to speculate about exactly what steps are necessary for Spain or Greece or other non-recognizers to make that big step. Certainly the United States is firmly committed to Kosovo's independence, and nobody should ever doubt that.
I do share that. If we look at the talks, which as such have even started back in 2004 and 2005 when we started first with the missing persons agenda, and now we left that talks. We're not talking anymore. There is no ICRC which is sharing it, but everything is under the EU auspices. What can be exactly the final outcome, the final agreement between Kosovo and Serbia, which doesn't breach by any way, shape or form the contact group 3 main principles: no partition, no unification with another country. So how can it look like? Because we know that back then you did draw your line exactly with the Russians in the team with you, and with the French and the German and the Italians and the Brits. So how can it look like nowadays, since the Russians are playing their own game with regard to Serbia especially?
Well, I will say again that we're not going to settle the exact path forward, here at this table. I believe that there are economic incentives for both Kosovo and Serbia. I also think that there are issues that ordinary citizens in both countries care about. You mentioned missing persons. Most of the missing persons are from the majority community, the Albanian community in Kosovo. And I've met with many of the survivors, the family members, and they just tell horrible, heart-rending stories. But I've also met with Kosovo Serbs survivors who have stories of their own. And people will say, well, you know, the percentages of the missing are this or that. I mean, we have to look beyond that sort of sterile analysis and acknowledge that there are people in every community who have suffered, who have felt pain, and who share a common interest in finding out what happened, you know, in coming to closure about their relatives. There are issues like this where people in civil society organizations and ordinary citizens, they are already reaching across borders to try to find common cause with people in the other country. You know, getting back to the economy for a second, when I meet with young tech leaders here in Kosovo, you know, visit Innovation Center Kosovo, for example. Yeah. I meet people who, you know, young tech geniuses. They've already got connections in Serbia. You know, they're doing projects jointly with other tech geniuses in other countries in the region. They don't talk about it a whole lot because to them it's not politics. It's just business. You know, so sometimes the best thing that governments can do is just get out of the way and let ordinary people and the private sector move forward.
The guidelines, no unification, no partition of Kosovo, are they still valid, sir? As far as the US administration is concerned?
I think we've made it clear, but I'm happy to discuss it some more, that we don't think that any kind of partition, land swap, border adjustment, whatever you want to call it, is in the cards. I mean, it's not something the US government has ever supported. You know, the most we've ever said, the most I've ever said, and I've been talking about this for a couple of years now, is if the people of Kosovo and Serbia wanted to reach a final agreement that the people of both countries, not just a couple of politicians in a windowless room, you know, would agree to, we'd look at it. You know, we wouldn't reject it out of hand. But there is zero appetite for that in Kosovo. I mean, across the political spectrum, nobody has any desire to adjust Kosovo's borders or anything like that. So, you know, people say, is land swap dead? And I say, yeah, it's dead. And then, you know, some anonymous person produces a non-paper and then...
saying exactly the opposite.
And then everybody is getting excited again, you know, and talking about it in the cafes and on television. I don't think you need to worry about that. I just don't think that that's a concern.
And what if the Europeans really tend to push it forward? Because as you're saying it, we have one Slovenian on paper, then we have the assumed one because no one from the Slovenian government said it's ours.
Right, so who knows
who
wrote
did the French,
these
nor the German government. We had the foreign minister Mas who said no to land swap, no to anything like that, which might have a domino effect and which has the international community has talked for so much, for so long time. But still,
you know, I don't know who writes these non-papers.
Me neither.
But whoever's doing it is probably enjoying this overreaction, you know, and it's not happening. It's just not going to happen. You know, neither the United States nor your European partners have any interest in foisting and pushing any kind of land swap on Kosovo, on the parties. So there's lots of there are a lot of other issues to discuss. There are a lot of other things to worry about. But, you know, but this is not one of them.
Are there any time frames which are not set but are forthcoming, for instance, about the talks between Serbia and Kosovo? Because as of now, there was no exact time frame, as it used to be with Ahtisaari plan. I will quote the Ahtisaari plan. Everything was in detail. 2 years this, after 3 years we have this, another one. In this case,
I haven't seen any timetable like that. I will say, however, that time is not on the side of the solution. You know, that meaning the longer this drags on, you know, the more Kosovo is going to be faced by the sort of economic problems that we talked about earlier. You know, resolving these issues with Serbia is going to be good for Kosovo's economic prospects and good for Serbia's economic prospects too. You know, we talked a little bit about how to make Kosovo more attractive as a venue for diaspora investment, but there are a lot of other potential investors in Kosovo. But an unfortunate number of them, they don't understand the country, they don't know anything about it. I can tell you that when I'm back in the States, and I'm talking to people about where I work, people still say, oh, is the war still going on? It's sad. That is still the image that potential foreign investors have of Kosovo. And American investors who are interested in putting their money abroad, they have a whole planet to choose from. It doesn't take much for an investor to say, boy, it sounds like the Balkans is a pretty complicated place. Maybe I'll invest my money in South America or Asia.
Easier than here.
So you're competing with the whole world.
Yeah. Should it have a time frame, the talks?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question.
Because what we've seen as of 2008 and actually pre-2008, pre-independence, is that there's nothing that tells us, all right, this is the timing that we need to do our homework. This is the time that we need to implement the agreements that we have agreed upon. And if we all look back from all the agreements that have been reached between Kosovo and Serbia, very little has been implemented.
I'm not going to pull a date, out of thin air.
Should there be any time frame, any timetable?
Right. What I think there needs to be is a coherent process, a predictable process, where people are not wondering, is there going to be a meeting between the Prime Minister and President Vučić? When will it happen? There should be there should be a plan to move forward, a plan on what the discussions are going to be. I think that when Prime Minister Kurti is absolutely correct when he says that we shouldn't have meetings just for the sake of meetings, that that both sides should be prepared, and if there should be discussions, they should have something to talk about. I also think that it is a positive sign that the Kurti government is talking about engaging with opposition parties, with civil society, with other stakeholders in Kosovo, because the dialogue is too important just to belong to one political party. Everyone in Kosovo has a stake in it.
Is there a room for optimism that the agreement may be reached?
Are
you optimistic? So. I mean, you will definitely say, yes, I am.
I will definitely say yes. I mean, if there isn't room for optimism, then
no time frame, no topics that we know, just one mediator, not the U.S. involved, and still you're optimistic.
Well, the U.S. is involved. Okay.
It's the EU-led process. We don't have any mediator from the U.S., which is strictly appointed for the...
But we're involved. We are in close contact with the EU and with the other parties.
Yeah, I do know.
And if we had walked away from this process entirely, then
would be a disaster.
People would be complaining about that. So that's not the case. I think so long as both parties, I mean Kosovo and Serbia, are moving forward, are willing to discuss the issues, come to the table having done their homework with with plans for detailed discussions, I think this can work. And this is the point where in this conversation somebody often mentions the Prespa agreement between Greece and North Macedonia, which took over 20 years, but they finally managed to do it. Now my point, and then people say, so do you think it will take another 20 years to reach agreement with Serbia? No, that's not what I'm saying, because I really believe that both countries have an interest in regional solutions to regional problems also. I didn't even mention COVID, which is a reminder that modern threats, like threats to public health, threats to the environment, cannot be resolved on a national basis alone. They require regional and international cooperation.
The Prespa agreement was made possible by the direct talks between the two parties. Is that something that can work out on the Kosovo and Serbia case as well, sir?
I think there are direct talks between Kosovo.
Direct talks meaning both Serbians and Kosovans meet wherever they would meet, be it in Vienna, be it in DC, be it at the Merdare border.
That's a fair question.
That's what I'm referring to, direct talks, without a mediator, for instance.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't believe that taking away EU mediation is going to help this process. So I think that continuing to meet under the auspices of the European Union with strong American involvement, is the best possible formula for now. If at some point in the future, since you're asking a lot of hypothetical questions, I'll give you one. If at some point in the future, a government in Serbia and a government in Kosovo say, why don't we have the next meeting without these Europeans and Americans and just do it ourselves? Go get a coffee at Murdare. Fine, so let them try. The point is to keep open the lines of communication.
Well, everyone is wondering now, since the Ahtisaari plan, that the Kosovan side being the ones who made the compromises so that it can reach independence and declare its independence from Serbia. Whom is to make more compromises in the future talks?
Yeah,
it takes two for tango, I get it, but still the compromises as such.
Yeah, I've been doing this negotiation stuff a long time.
Okay.
And, all of us do, right? We negotiate with our family members.
We do.
We negotiate with our neighbors. I mean, we negotiate with our children, who are some of the toughest negotiators.
Toughest ones.
So you don't have to be a professional diplomat to know what it means to negotiate. And I will say this, I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've started off a negotiation, whether it's at my kitchen table, or at some diplomatic function, by saying, I'm not going to compromise, I'm not going to give you anything, I'm just here to listen and then walk out. That's not a good formula for negotiation, whether it's at home or in international affairs. So I think for anyone to say, we've given up everything we're going to give up, we're never going to make another concession, is just not a realistic way to approach any negotiation.
Can Russia get involved in the talks, besides the EU and the US?
I don't see any value in that.
Okay, very straight answer. And what if Serbia asks for? Would you accommodate their requests? Or you don't want to see Russia's getting involved into the process?
Don't see any value in that. People have been asking this hypothetical for a long time. I think that there are enough cooks in the kitchen now.
Okay, so we don't need more to come. So they can't help in any way, shape or form, as you think. What about, some call it the non-papers, as being really much more into pro-Serbian than we can see it and we can read it, without being in diplomats. What would you call it? How do you read it, the non-papers?
I'm not going to speculate about who produced them or what the purpose is. As we discussed earlier, all the relevant governments have denied that they represent their official government policies. So I think that we're giving the non-papers more oxygen than they deserve, frankly.
Than they deserve. Very interesting. Prime Minister, talking about the Washington Agreement, Prime Minister Kurti described it as a Swedish table of buffet. Have you read his piece that he did it on time? What do you make of it?
Well, I discussed this with the Prime Minister as well. We don't really agree with that. I mean, we think that the items in the Washington Agreement all make sense, and that they deserve the attention of both governments. Having said that, are some things higher priorities than others? I mean, that's fair. There's some things, as I said earlier, that have already been achieved, or at least substantial progress has been made. I think one can legitimately talk about how much energy the Kosovo and Serbia and others should put into building highways, building rail links. You like to talk about timelines, Fatmir. I mean, when...
Well, you would want to if you would be a journalist.
So I'm saying this is a legitimate topic for discussion, how to prioritize these things, But we think they all make sense. And
although the Prime Minister says that some have been made, some pieces in the agreement, the Washington Agreement, are made as such because they knew that the government, the Houthi government, will disappear in a month's time, and that no timetables had been written exactly as to what it looks like.
I think that something I've said before is that it's more important to ask, are these measures worth doing? Are they worth pursuing? Than to focus on the process by which they were produced. And I stand by that. Okay. I think that if these steps are worth pursuing, then we should all pursue them.
The isolation that Kosovo faces since when the White Schengen Lista was expanded back in 2003 or 4, sorry for that, if I'm mistaken. How do you look at it, sir? How do you see it? The isolation of 1.8 million people which depend on their political leaders as to what they will say to the world, but no one asks them exactly how do they feel.
Well, I think Kosovo has enormous potential to strengthen its ties to the region, to strengthen its ties to all of Europe and to the world. And, you asked me if I'm an optimist. I am. We've talked a little bit about the new connection, the newborn connection to Israel. We've talked about the opportunities for regional economic integration. I have met very impressive people from Kosovo who've gone overseas, who plan to come back here, in order to build their futures here. Now, if you're talking about visa liberalization, as an American, it's easy for me to say I think it's overdue, and that Kosovo should have the opportunity, citizens of Kosovo should have the same opportunities to travel as other Europeans. I don't control that, but I think that it would be a very positive step.
Some are saying that Prime Minister Kurti should exactly hit the brakes and wait for the European Union what they will give in return for, if I can put it that way, undiplomatically, what they will give in return to Kosovo, be it economical development, be it the visa liberalization.
Mm-hmm. Well, some people speak in those terms. Other people don't like the idea of linking Kosovo's relations to Europe to progress on the dialogue, because that essentially holds visa liberalization or increased investment or whatever hostage to the dialogue process, and which Kosovo doesn't fully control. Yeah. So I think that I don't think it's presumptuous for me to say that European governments should make decisions about their economic and political relations with Kosovo on their own based on what makes sense for them, just like the United States. I think that we are strengthening, we hope to strengthen our investment, our economic connections here, regardless of what happens with the dialogue. But at the same time, there is no contradiction between wanting to see Kosovo have stronger economic connections throughout the Balkans, throughout Europe, and wanting to see stronger economic ties to the United States. It's not a competition.
As of now, do you see that both President Vučić and Prime Minister Kurti have the strength and the power to really reach an agreement?
I do.
The final one that we're all expecting. Because if you look back from former President Tadić, he's nowhere in politics since the Ahtisaari plan. Just recently, a month or two ago, he announced that he may be returning into politics.
I think that the leaders of the two countries have a responsibility to their people to try to reach a comprehensive agreement. As I said earlier, though, it's bigger than just any political party. So where Kosovo is concerned, I think it's important for the Kurti government to talk to other stakeholders, to civil society, to other political parties, so that when Kosovo's negotiators are sitting down across a table from people from Serbia, that the other side knows that they're negotiating not just with a political party, but with the Republic of Kosovo.
Right. Can the lawsuit announced by Kosovo again for genocide against Serbia harm in any way the talks? Because I've seen earlier President Vučić just said that he kind of prayed for that it doesn't happen.
I'm sorry, he said what?
Can the lawsuit announced by Kosovo's government, by Kurti government on the genocide, harm the dialogue process?
I think it's important for both sides to posture less, to speak less to the media, and to speak to each other more. I mean, it's natural before any international negotiation. Political leaders make statements. They kind of, we say, shape the battlefield. Okay. But the bottom line is, once they sit down at a table and the doors close, that's when the real business begins.
Are you saying that it's not wise to file the lawsuit? Have I read it properly, what you just said?
I didn't say that.
Have I read it properly? I didn't say you said. Have I read it properly, sir? Is it wise then? Is it wise in these times that Kosovo files a lawsuit whenever it intends to file it?
I think that there is a lot of posturing on both sides that is not necessarily helpful to moving forward.
Including the lawsuit or not?
I think there's a lot of posturing on both sides. Okay. One thing that we've made clear, for example, is that when the topic of reciprocal trade barriers comes up, so-called reciprocity, our view, and here I think that we are in lockstep with the European Union, our view is that the goal should be for all the countries in the region to eliminate these barriers, not for countries to add new and elegant non-tariff barriers. I completely acknowledge, and I've said this before, Kosovo has a sovereign right to institute barriers, just like other countries do, but it's not healthy. It's not healthy for trade. It's not healthy for anyone. One of the responses to the Great Depression in 1929, was that the United States government decided to institute import tariff barriers. It was a huge mistake and caused enormous economic damage and helped to bring about the Great Depression. So I think that sometimes it's important for governments to acknowledge that just because they have the sovereign right to do something, it doesn't mean they have to actually go ahead and do it.
Including the lawsuit. But you're not talking exactly about the lawsuit. In past weeks, Russia sent more than 100,000 troops on the Russian side of its border with Ukraine, those alarming the Ukrainians and its allies. In recent days, those troops have started to pull back, but many still remain on site. On the other hand, we have the Defender Europe 2021, which is just in the neighborhood in an exercise that is 1/3, if I may put it so, the Russian size, because around 28,000 troops are on the ground and doing exercise to show the force. This year, for the first time, Kosovo has been invited to, which is a great success story for the country, and everyone sees it. So to demonstrate its capacities, but everyone is asking, what messages does NATO want to send with the exercise?
Well, I don't speak for NATO, but I will speak for the United States. And the United States supports Kosovo's involvement in Defender 21, just like we support Kosovo's efforts to become more involved in international peacekeeping missions overseas. We believe that the Kosovo Security Force exists to defend the country, but also because people in Kosovo tell me all the time that they're tired of being just an importer of international security.
But being exported.
They want to start doing their part to maintain peace and stability around the world. And it starts on a small scale, but I think that the United States is deeply invested, and again, I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about expertise and training, education, in building the Kosovo Security Force into a modern force that can help to defend the country and that can be a partner to the United States and other Western countries. That's why we focus so much, not just on providing equipment, but in helping the future leaders of the KSF learn how we think about strategy, how we think about military operations. That's why there are extraordinary young people from Kosovo, at the U.S. Military Academy, at the U.S. Air Force Academy. It's to learn how we do things so we can do better partners. So I would look at Defender Europe 21 in that context. It's a way of helping Kosovo to become more able to partner with the United States and other Western countries. It's not a provocation against anybody.
Provocation about Russia. Great. We've seen Russia in the region getting involved into Macedonia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and especially very great involvement in Serbia. But not just Russians in Serbia, we see Chinese involvement as well, Chinese investments, United Emirates. The fake news industry, the cyber war, is one of the greatest threats for the professional journalism, but not just for the entire democracy. Do you see any threats by Russia, be it by China, to disseminate and to misinform the public as to what it really means to be alienated through the European Union and NATO allies instead of being in a stalemate or status neutral as Serbia is towards NATO?
Well, desinformatia is a Russian word.
It is.
And, we've seen in recent years ongoing efforts by Russian authorities to interfere with elections in the United States and many other countries, to disseminate all manner of disinformation and misinformation to the point where people are exhausted. People in my country, people in many other countries have had their faith in the media shattered. I mean, they say, "Oh, I just can't believe, I don't know what to believe anymore." You know?
Indeed.
And I think that for that very reason, it's more important now than ever to have professional media that will look for the facts, that people can trust. It's also vital that we all avoid the temptation to find one television station or one website that just reinforces our own worldview, our own prejudices. You know, we need to get out of our bubbles. We need to listen to differing points of view. We need to, those of us who meet with the media, you know, should meet with media across the spectrum. I think that it's very important that young people also learn how to discriminate in media. You know, how to fact check, how to challenge sources that don't sound right. Now, that's exhausting. You know, we can't all be full-time professional journalists trying to separate fact from fiction. So we need people like you to do it.
Is there any pattern or strategy that you see that someone is aiming exactly to create problems in the Balkans with dissemination of fake news? Huh?
I think it's part of an overall strategy by certain countries to
Does Russia do it? Is Turkey doing it? Is China doing it?
Well,
I see more news about China highways nowadays on the internet that I used to see 5 or 6 years ago, which means nothing to me. Why should I be interested in Russian highways or Chinese highways?
Well, I don't know what's going on.
As an example.
Yeah, I don't know about that specific example. I do think that it's clear that, you know, China and Russia want to spread their influence in this part of Europe in any way that they can. You know,
why, sir? Every people in Kosovo ask, why is the China and Russia interested about Kosovo, since no one traditionally has ever looked upon Russia or China as their allies or someone who may know how in what troubles they are?
Well, I think Russia is trying to weaken the ties between countries in the Balkans and Western Europe and the United States, to weaken the transatlantic partnership. That's pretty clear. China, you know, there's a cliche that...
What about China?
There's a cliche that, you know, American businesses think 3 months ahead, and the Chinese think in terms of centuries, you know. There are a lot of other countries in Europe that will report in recent years they've seen a big upsurge in Chinese interest, Chinese investment. I'm not going to say it's all evil. You know, if the Chinese want to build a highway someplace...
Macedonia, they had a contract, but they haven't done it. And then they had to do it another one.
I think countries are better off, you know, dealing with American companies, and, you know, we often partner with reliable companies from other countries. You know, the highway to Skopje, for example.
Yes,
you know, it's Bektelenka. It's a U.S. Turkish, you know, joint venture. It's very constructive, very productive for everybody involved. So, you know, I think people in Kosovo know who their friends are, and they can trust the United States, they can trust the U.S. government, they can trust American companies, you know, to be fair partners. And so I think that Kosovo's future lies in close partnership with the United States and also with Western Europe.
With Western Europe rather than with Russia, Turkey and China. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Great pleasure having you here.
Thank you for having
Great
me.
honor. Zonja dhe zotrin, ishim me ambasadorin Philp Kosnett të Shtetet Bashkuara të Amerikës, ju lëm tani në vazhdim të programit. Mirëmbëjtje. Thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.